Welcome to EduRev.
Hello, my name is Harshmeet Singh and I have been teaching UPSC Civil Services aspirants Indian Polity for more than 5 years across the country now. In this video, I will be taking you through with some important acts that were introduced by the British before our constitution was made. So we will be discussing what the historical development of the Indian constitution with the help of three very important acts. I hope you have already seen the earlier video in which I had discussed with you the 1773, 1781 and the 1784 Act. In this video, we will be discussing the 1793 Charter Act, the 1813 Act, the 1833 Act, and we will end it with the 1853 Act just before our first revolt against the British. Now, the Charter Act of 1793 came at a very interesting time. As I said earlier also, आपको ये एक्ट्स अगर समझनी है, you have to understand the history of that time. What was happening, इंग्लैंड में क्या हो रहा था, इंडिया में क्या हो रहा था. Now, before 1793, a very interesting person came to India, who was Lord Cornwallis. Now, Lord Cornwallis came to India and became the Governor General of Bengal from 1786 to 1793. अब Cornwallis was a very different kind of a person. क्यों? See, Cornwallis से पहले, before Cornwallis जो भी यहाँ पे आया था as a Governor General of Bengal, they came from common middle class families. They were a part of the company, and that is why they were sent. And most of them indulged in a lot of corruption. Warren Hastings थे, Robert Clive थे, वो सब के सब काफी corruption cases थे उनके against. Cornwallis, on the other hand, belonged to a royal family. वो हमेशा से he belonged to a very financially strong background. He was close to the monarchy also. So it was thought when Cornwallis would come to India, he would not indulge in corruption because he himself has a lot of money. That was the expectation. Now, when you send such a kind of person to a position, you obviously have to give him more powers. For example, आपके घर पे कोई common मेहमान आता है, so you serve him something else. But when a very high background or a high society guest comes to your place, आप अपना सबसे अच्छा क्रॉकरी सेट निकालते हो, यू ऑफर इन द बेस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट यू हैव, क्योंकि आपको उन्हें अच्छे से प्रेजेंट करना है. द सेम हैपेंड विद कॉर्नवालिस. सो व्हेन कॉर्नवालिस हैड कम टू इंडिया, अ लॉट ऑफ पावर्स वर गिवन टू गवर्नर जनरल. गवर्नर जनरल को काफ़ी सारी और पावर्स दी गई थी. इफ यू रिमेंबर, इन 1773 एक्ट वॉरेन हेस्टिंग्स के साथ एक एग्जीक्यूटिव काउंसिल दे दी गई थी उनको ऑफ 4 पीपल, एंड दीज पीपल नाउ हैड टू टेक डिसीजंस बाय मेजॉरिटी वोट. मीन्स गवर्नर जनरल सारे के सारे डिसीजन अब खुद नहीं ले सकता था. विद कॉर्नवालिस दिस चेंज. Cornwallis, because as I said, Cornwallis came from a very high class background, very strong background financially and politically. इसलिए Cornwallis को ज़्यादा पावर दी गई थी so that he could work independently. 1793 की एक्ट इसलिए भी आई थी, as I said earlier also, जो चार्टर मिलता था ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी को इंडिया में काम करने के लिए, वो 20 years के लिए मिलता था. So 1773 के चार्टर में permission was given for 20 more years. Then it had to be renewed in 1793, then in 1813, then in 1833. इसलिए 1793 का एक्ट आया था. So it gave the East India Company permission for 20 more years to trade in India with a monopoly, and more powers were given to Governor General. Now, what were the more powers? In some cases, he could override his council. Council का जो majority decision होगा उसको override कर सकते हैं कुछ cases में the Governor General. Apart from this, कहा जाता है when Cornwallis was asked कि आप जाइए वहाँ पे इंडिया में as a Governor General, he said I will not go unless I am also given the power of the military. अभी तक military के head होते थे Commander in Chief. Commander in Chief को भी काफ़ी powers थी. He was a member of the Executive Council. But अब क्या हुआ, Cornwallis के अंडर ये decide हो गया Cornwallis के बाद कि Commander in Chief now will not be a member of the council. So Commander in Chief को council का member automatically अब नहीं बनाया जाएगा, so that the Governor General of Bengal would have all the powers in his hand. Apart from this, एक और काफ़ी important चीज़ हुई थी from 1793 Charter Act. There was a separation of revenue and judiciary functions. So revenue administration, revenue courts अलग हो गए थे, and the judicial courts were separate. और इसीलिए माल अदालत बनाई गई, माल अदालत चली गई थी. माल अदालत्स were the courts that were adjudicating over revenue cases also, other kinds of cases also. These were usually adjudicated by the zamindars only. द जमींदार who used to take rent वही जज बन जाते थे, तो उसको हटा दिया गया, बिकॉज द सेम पर्सन who takes rent कैन नॉट प्रिसाइड ओवर केसेस अगर कोई कहता है कि मेरे से ज़्यादा रेंट लिया गया. तो दीज वर सर्टेन स्मॉल चेंजेस इंट्रोड्यूस इन द 1793 एक्ट. Then came the Charter Act of 1813, क्योंकि 20 years पूरे हो गए हैं, so 20 years के बाद obviously एक और एक्ट आएगा. That was the Charter Act of 1813. Now, the time of Charter Act of 1813 was very, very important. And for understanding this, you have to understand what was happening in Europe, in countries across the world. So in Europe, Napoleon in 1801, 1802 had become the emperor of France and he was capturing Europe. So Napoleon ने एक एक करके almost पूरे यूरोप पे कब्जा कर लिया था. The only country which Napoleon could not defeat, so Napoleon नहीं हरा पा रहे थे, was England. England was much stronger. It had a very, very strong navy. So Napoleon England को अभी भी नहीं हरा पा रहे थे. So what Napoleon did, अभी अगर India or China has a problem, what do we say to China? What do? We don't declare a war because we know they have a very strong army, very strong navy. So what we do is we call for boycotting of Chinese product. China का सामान नहीं लेंगे, we will hurt them economically, right? Exactly same was happening with England at that time. England of that era, due to industrial revolution, was very similar to China. वो भी बहुत सारा सामान बनाते थे. They used to sell it across the world at a very cheap price. पूरे यूरोप में उनका सामान बिकता था. So what Napoleon did was Napoleon started continental system. Continental system meant कि now European countries will not be allowed to buy stuff from England. England से सामान नहीं किसी को लेने दिया जाएगा. He used to make sure that his navy surrounds all the countries and the British ships are not allowed. अब हुआ क्या इससे? Because of this, the industries in England started to hurt. Their market was being closed. उन्हें सामान कहीं और बेचना था. अब कहाँ बेच सकते थे? They could sell in India, but India में तो ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी को मोनोपोली थी, कोई और कंपनी अलाउड ही नहीं थी वहाँ पे जाना. So a lot of pressure was built on the British Parliament by British traders कि हमें इंडिया में जाके अब ट्रेड करना अलाउ किया जाए. क्यों अलाउ किया जाए? Because now we can't sell products in Europe. यूरोप में सामान बेचना मुश्किल हो गया है, so we have to go back to, now we have to go in India. Under this pressure, it was finally decided कि East India Company's monopoly came to an end. So Charter Act of 1813, very, very important because the company's monopoly came to an end. Now the company only had monopoly in trade with tea and trade with China. So अभी टी के ट्रेड करने के लिए और चाइना के साथ ट्रेड करने के लिए the company still had monopoly कि वही ट्रेड कर सकते थे. But in all other aspects, other companies from Britain, other merchants of Britain were also allowed. वो भी आते चाहते तो आकर के इंडिया में ट्रेड कर सकते थे. So all the other trade was open because of the pressure of Napoleon, because of the demand in Europe that in England that we want markets to be opened. Apart from this, Christian missionaries were now freely allowed to go to India to propagate their religion, and that is when conversion of Indians to Christianity also started to a large extent, when the Christian missionaries were freely allowed to come here, to have property, to settle. Then importantly, company announced that they will now invest 1 lakh rupees every year on the education of Indians. This is again a very, very important point. Why? Because this 1 lakh rupee gave rise to a debate. How will this 1 lakh rupee be spent? There was one view that it should be spent on Indian education. Indians should learn about India's history, about the Vedas, about the literature. But the other view was, and many British understood this very well, that if we teach British or if we teach British history to the Indians, it would be much more beneficial to the British. So they wanted to teach British history. They wanted to teach British knowledge to Indians. Why? So that Indians could turn into British people. Indians could now start coming closer to the British. Indians would not revolt against the British. They would now see British rule as something that is good for them. So it was decided that the 1 lakh rupee would be spent on European and Anglicized education and not on Indian education. Apart from this, this act for the first time explicitly said that the constitutional position of the British territories in India. So it explicitly said that the constitutional position will be given to British territories in India. That is again a very, very important point which you must remember. And one more small point, that local governments in India were also empowered to impose taxes on the people, and those who did not pay the taxes could be punished. The most important point in all this 1813 Act, which is asked very, very regularly, is that the monopoly in trade had ended except in tea and in China. The other point you need to remember is the Christian missionary point and the education 1 lakh rupee per year to be spent. These are the points which are regularly asked from this Act. Then 20 years later again came the 1833 Charter Act, one of the most important acts in India's history. This was the act when centralization of government began. So till now there was no government of India as such. There was government of Bengal, there was government of Bombay, there was government of Madras, but there was no government of India. This was when government of India started. How? In 1833 Act, it said that from now onwards, Governor General of Bengal will now be called as Governor General of India. And William Bentinck became the first Governor General of India. So it started the centralization of government because the government of Bengal now became the government of India. It also meant that now Bombay and Madras could not make their own laws. Till now they had the power to make their own laws, but this power was taken away now. There was only central legislature for India. So the government of India will make all the laws for all the territories that British had. Bombay and Madras could not make their own laws. The remaining monopoly of trade also ended. The monopoly of tea, the monopoly of trade with China had also ended. In fact, East India Company's commercial activities had come to an end. They could not trade any further. Now they became just an administrative body ruling over India. That was further enforced when the Act said that the British colonization in India has been legalized and now the possessions of the company will remain under the government but were, and it's very important, quotes open, in trust for His Majesty, his heir and the successors. So the British had mentioned that whatever territories that the company had earlier, that will now all be governed under or in the name of the Majesty, in the name of the monarch and no one else. Also, the Governor General's Council, which started with 4, it had turned into 3 with Pitt's India Act. It again had a 4th member. Now, this is important. If you remember the first video that we did, in 1773 Regulating Act, a 4-member Executive Council was appointed. In the 1784 Pitt's India Act, it was changed to 3 members. And in 1833 Act, it was again changed to 4 members. The 4th member that was added was not given complete powers. Okay. The 4th member that was added was not entitled to act in the council except for legislative purposes. So only when the law making was happening, only then the 4th member was invited, but otherwise the 4th member was not invited in the council. This 4th member was a very, very famous person of that time, Lord Macaulay. You will hear Lord Macaulay's word a lot of times when you read modern history. His views on education, his views on English medium education was what set up India's first education system. And he was the one who decided that 1 lakh rupees will be spent on English education. So the 4th member was added, which was Lord Macaulay. This was not given complete powers, it was only given powers for legislative purposes. That is why the 4th member was also called the law member. Apart from this, the Charter Act for the first time made an attempt to codify Indian laws. Now, what is codification of laws? See, till now, Muslims had some different law, Hindus had a different law of their own. The laws were depending upon religion at that time. Now codification of laws was being done. Codification means same laws for everyone, same standard laws for everyone, irrespective of whichever religion, whichever background that you have. That was done through 1833 Act. So they set up an Indian Law Commission for this purpose to go through our laws and to codify them. This act also said that from now onwards, there would be no discrimination amongst Indians on the basis of their religion, birth, descent, etc. when it comes to employment under the company. So one of the problems that Indians had was till now only the English were allowed to work under the company. Government jobs were not open to Indians. This act said this will now make the government jobs open to Indians also. It also said that a college would be set up called the Haileybury College of London, which would train the future civil servants, and it would have an open competition. Anyone who wants to serve in the company would have to go through a competition. But mind you, the last 2 points that Indians would now get jobs and they would not be discriminated or there would be an open system of examination, these were just points in the writing on paper, but in reality it was not happening. In reality, the government job for Indian was still closed. In reality, there was no fair competition system for civil services even then. Then came the Charter Act of 1853, the last act that came up before the Indian Sepoy Mutiny. Now, this act came at a time when British also understood that our rule in the form of company has to change and the things were going out of control. What they did was the directors of the company, if you remember, we had discussed that the company was governed by court of directors till 1784. In 1784, another body was made over them called the Board of Control. So, court of directors, which had 24 people, they were now reduced to 18. Out of these 18, also 6 were appointed by the crown. So, crown now had a lot of powers. Crown means the monarchy. It also said that the Council for Governor General for legislative purposes would be further expanded. Fourth member, which was Lord Macaulay, if you remember, he was given equal status. So now Executive Council had 4 full-time members. Then there was a Legislative Council. So Legislative Council was for making of laws like the Parliament. The Executive Council were like the ministers that we have. So the Executive Council had 4 members, 4 full-time members. Legislative Council was different. It had 12 members that made laws. Now these 12 members may be difficult for you to remember. I won't say that you have to remember all of them, how did the 12 members formed, but remember that in the 1853 Act, the Legislative Council had 12 members. I would still like you to go through it. These 12 members were the Governor General, the Commander-in-Chief, the 4 members of the Executive Council automatically were here, Chief Justice of the High Court, a retired judge or a regular judge of the, Supreme Court, not the High Court, the retired regular judge of a Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Then there were 4 other people who were nominated from amongst the people working for the company, who had worked for at least 10 years in the company. They were nominated from Bengal, Madras, Bombay, and the Northwest provinces. These together made up 12 members who were the Legislative Council. So this was beginning of the Parliament in the true sense. They were the ones who were making laws, and the Executive Council was implementing the laws. This was the act when the open competition system for civil services actually began truly. In 1854, open competition system began. Whoever wanted to work as a civil servant for the company could come and write the examination. Although it was an open examination, it was very, very, very difficult for Indians to go through because it was held only in London. The maximum age was 19 to begin with, so very few people could write the examination. The syllabus was in Latin, there was English history that was ours and not the Indian history. So every arrangement was made for Indians not to crack the examination, but still some Indians did manage to go through this examination. The Charter Act of 1853 did not extend the license of the company for any more time because they knew that the rule of the company was going to end very, very soon. As I said, this was the beginning of the parliamentary system in India. Why? Because for the first time, Legislative Council was clearly defined, Executive Council was clearly defined. So for the first time, Parliament was defined, for the first time, Council of Ministers were defined. So that is how the 1853 Act shaped up India for the future. Now I have 2 questions for you, and these questions have been asked by UPSC in the previous years to test your knowledge. The first question is, which of these is not a part of the Charter Act of 1833? You can take your 10-20 seconds, see the option on the screen clearly, and then try to answer this question. Trading activities were abolished. Governor General of India was now made the supreme authority of India. Law-making power was given to Governor General and Council, and Indian was to be appointed as a law member. As you can see, the 4th is incorrect. The 4th member was not supposed to be an Indian. 4th member was added, that was fine, but not an Indian. Who was the first 4th member? This member was Lord Macaulay. As we had just discussed, Lord Macaulay was the 4th member. So 4th member was added back, that is fine, but not an Indian. So D is the correct answer. Another question from this part asked previously by the UPSC. You have to tell which of these is not correctly matched. We have read all these acts. 1773, BITS India Act, Charter Act of 1813 and the Charter Act of 1833. You can take your 10-15 seconds, go through the options, and you will see very easily C is incorrect. Why? It was not the 1813 Act that ended the activities of East India Company as a commercial body, it was the 1833 Act. So this part was done by 1833 Act and not the 1813 Act. This brings me to the end of this video. Just to remind you, EduRev Infinity has over 10,000 practice questions prepared by the UPSC experts as per the level of UPSC, which can help you in cracking your dream examination. Thank you so much for watching the video.